Good day, everyone. Today's Thursday, May 21st, and today we're going to keep going in our Unit 7 packet on the Renaissance and Reformation. So let's take a look at our schedule and see what's on deck. Today we're going to take a look at pages 3 to 5, which covers the circumstances that led to the Renaissance. So yesterday we talked a little bit about what Renaissance means. It means a rebirth of an old ideas or an old movement of some kind. And we got a little bit of an introduction into what those things were. Most of what is being reborn or rediscovered is the old classical ideas of cultural elements like Greco-Roman architecture and how they focused on designing things like their sculptures and art. So we're going to look a little bit into what leads up to this rediscovery of Greco-Roman culture, and also particularly where it begins and why. All right, so let's go over to our packet pages. We need to start on page 3. So the question at the top of this page, which was basically the question we're answering for the next 2 pages, what were the geographic and historical circumstances that led to the start of the Renaissance in Italy? So just as a quick little reminder, going back to our geography context here that introduced us to where these ideas were coming from, Italy right here, there's the boot of the Italian peninsula, very easy to point out. This is the birthplace of the Renaissance. This is where it's all starting. So we already discussed a little bit about the Greco-Roman architecture that is characteristic of this rebirth of this time period in this event. And we also said that the civilization that had preserved and kind of kept a lot of that Greco-Roman knowledge was the Ottoman Empire. This is the Islamic civilization in the Middle East that had taken over the Byzantine Empire, and they're the ones that will be, closest and trading with Europeans through Italy during this time period. So keep that in perspective. What we want to discuss, we want to explore a little bit further some of the geographic and historical circumstances that lead to the Renaissance starting, particularly in Italy. So on page 3, we want to take a little step back and just paint a picture of what is happening before the Renaissance starts. So this is what we call historical context. Sometimes it has to do with geography, sometimes it just has to do with the ideas and events and what the culture of the time is. So we want to paint a picture of where we are coming from in order to help us understand where things are going. So what I want you to do in just a second is to take a few minutes on your own, and I want you to think about these 4 concepts or events. This is a recall question. So it can be anything that you remember from these concepts or events. I want you to see if you can jot down, after brainstorming, one piece of information for each of these concepts or events. And there's some visuals up here just to give you a little bit of a refresher and to trigger your memory. So pause the video now, take a moment to jot down or to at least think in your brains of one piece of information you remember about the feudal system, the Black Plague, manorialism, and the Crusades. Okay, so I'm going to go over to our slides in just a second, but what we're doing from this brainstorming is we're trying to think about one way that Italy played an important role in any one of these events or concepts that we painted a picture of, that we brainstormed. So let's go over to our slides. Okay, so anything that you guys had for your brainstorming of these 4 concepts or events is fine. I want you to keep them in there. You can add a few things to your boxes based on what I have here, if you have room. But I'm going to throw these up here just to give you my picture. So this is what we are coming from. In the Middle Ages, anywhere from 476 CE in the fall of Rome, all the way up to about the 1300s, 1400s. This is what we're dealing with. This is the picture of Europe at the time. It is structured in a feudal system where there's a hierarchy of social classes that's based on the exchange of food and land for loyalty and service. Remember, this is a very strict system. There is not a lot of social mobility. whatever social class you were born into, you basically stayed there. There was very little opportunity to improve your lives. And kind of jumping over in logical sequence, think about manorialism. This feudal system is the political and social structure, but what actually did life look like in feudal medieval Europe? Well, everybody lived on these isolated, self-sufficient manors. These small little towns that produced everything that somebody needed. So therefore, they didn't really need to trade with other towns or other civilizations very often at all. There was very little trading, and towns were basically isolated from each other unless you were at war and traveling to go to battle with someone. And then 1300s comes along, and we have to deal with the Black Plague. And one thing, if you remember anything about the Black Plague, is the vast impact that it had on population. About 1/3 of Europe's population is killed from this Black Plague because of its very quickly and easily spread contagion. And then don't forget, there's also a major event that we covered actually back in our Islam unit, but that is happening around the Middle Ages too. This cultural and religious event of the Crusades. These were wars between Christians and Muslims over the Holy Land of Jerusalem. So there's a little bit of a picture just to remind you of what is going on at the time in Europe in the Middle Ages. So we're trying to think of one way that Italy played an important role in any of these concepts or events above. You can take a second and pause here if you like to see if you can brainstorm any way that Italy is kind of connected to these events. All right, so I'm actually going to share two ways that I thought of how Italy is connected to these events. Probably the biggest and most important way that we're going to see results in the Renaissance is that the Black Plague ends up entering Europe from Asia through trade ships that were coming into Italian ports. Remember the 12 Genoan ships that had come into the port of Genoa in Italy, carrying cargo and people, but also stowed away in that cargo were rats with fleas on their backs, fleas that were biting the rats, and then fleas that would jump off onto people as they were taking a rest and napping and bite people. And they were transmitting that disease from the rats to humans through the fleas that would bite. So this is kind of the same way that that lots of things spread and travel is through trade. In this case, it's a disease, but with the Renaissance, we're going to see that it's an idea. One other thing, if you were brainstorming, that you might have thought of was that Italy was also kind of the base of the Roman Catholic Church, or the Christian Church at the time. The Pope's headquarters, so to speak, was in Italy, and hence this is why we call it today the Holy Roman Catholic Church, which was also a name commonly used back then also. So this is the picture that we want to set ourselves up in. Let's go back to our packet so I can show you the next page. Okay, so this is a little story about two Italian artists, and this is going to help us just get a sense of how somebody would get into this revival of Greco-Roman architecture and art. It's all about location and kind of who you know and where you are. So this is a story of Mario versus Giovanni, who will become a successful Italian artist. So we're going to read a short little story about Mario and Giovanni and respond to one simple question below. So guys, these are just pretend characters that we're using to illustrate a concept in history. They're not actual, real key people that we need to remember. So there's a little introduction to where Mario and Giovanni are coming from. Giovanni de Nowheresville and Mario de Wealthton. So these are obviously made up names. Nowheresville is going to show us a little bit about what Giovanni's story is all about, and Wealthton is where Mario's from, and that's going to be very characteristic of his story too. So both of these guys were aspiring artists in Italy during the Renaissance. They went to the same university to study sculpture. They had all the same professors and were both very accomplished students. After their studies finished, both of them went to their hometowns. Giovanni went back to Nowheresville. Mario went back to Wealthton. They went back to their hometowns to see if they could make careers out of being sculptors. So let's see what happens with Mario. Mario, of course, lived in Wealthton, a trading city on the coast of Italy. Since there were a lot of merchants in Wealthton, there were also a lot of rich people. Some of the rich people liked to adorn their homes and the city with sculptures, so they used their money to hire artists to create those sculptures. Mario became an apprentice of one of the artists who was often hired by the wealthy merchants and bankers. Then some of them asked Mario, to create sculptures of his own. All right, so let's read a little bit about Giovanni's story after coming back from the same University of Sculpture. So Giovanni lived in Nowheresville, a small farming town far from the coast of Italy. Most people in Nowheresville were farmers, so when Giovanni returned, he got a job as a farmer and sculpted in the evenings when he was done working. It took him years to finish a sculpture, and when he was finished, he tried to sell it, but no one in his town had extra money to spend on it. So think about those two stories. Both had the same beginnings, the same background and knowledge and education of sculpting. But our question is, why did Mario become a successful artist and Giovanni did not? So I'm going to go over to our slide so we can answer this together. All right, so this is really a story and a lesson of being in the right place at the right time, and also knowing how to network. Knowing who you need to be connected with in order to get opportunities and to get chances. So think about and kind of answer to yourself, which one became successful? Mario ended up being hired by some of the artists, the wealthy merchants and bankers that wanted to have Mario, create sculptures for them. Giovanni was making excellent sculptures, but it took him a really long time because he had a regular job as a farmer, and he was trying to sell those sculptures to other farmers in his town, but nobody wanted to buy them. So Mario becomes a successful artist because he lived in the right location and also because of who he knew. The difference between Wealthton and Nowheresville is the type of economy and the type of people that live there. Over here in the city, we have wealthy merchants, people that are trading and doing business. Over here, we have farmers. Not necessarily, that farmers don't make any money, but they're usually not incredibly wealthy. And then out in the countryside in a farming town, there's not a lot of, very rich people that are looking to spend their money in all kinds of interesting, creative ways. So the reason that Mario becomes successful and Giovanni does not is because Mario stayed in a wealthy trade city where he was from, his hometown. He became a sculptor's apprentice and was able to sell his artwork to wealthy merchants. He was in the right spot, and he knew how to network to the right people. Giovanni, on the other hand, returned to his farming town after sculptor school and sculpted in the evenings after working on the farm. There was no wealthy merchants or business people in a farming town that wanted to spend money on his artwork. So again, this is a lesson of being in the right place at the right time. So let's go over to our packet for our very last page. So we want to basically know why Italian cities were the right place at the right time. And how were they so connected to these Ottoman and Islamic civilizations in the Middle East that were preserving and studying Greco-Roman sculpture and ideas and culture? Because that is what is being reborn, is the Greco-Roman culture from ancient classical times. But it is all starting to be rediscovered and used in Italy. So why? Now, it has a lot to do with trade routes and the major cities that are in Italy. So we're going to read over this little couple of paragraphs and point out a couple of concepts that are shown on the map in order to answer our question below. Trade routes that existed since the Roman Empire were infused by new wealth and products after the Crusades, when medieval Europeans became more interested in the rest of the world. Italy was the physical connection between Western Europe and Islamic civilizations of the Middle East. As a result, trade between Italian cities like Venice and Genoa and the Ottoman Empire increased. So this is a little bit of our geographic context. You might recognize like modern day Turkey, and this is where Constantinople was. This was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. When the Ottomans take over this city, and hence also the rest of the Byzantine Empire, this is now one of the pieces of the Ottoman Empire. You might recognize down here, this is where the Nile River starts and you go into Egypt. So if we can't really zoom out of this map right now, but this is the Middle East. This is where Asia begins, where the Islamic civilizations are flourishing. And over here, we have medieval Europe. So geographically and physically, Italy sticking out here like a speed bump to the Mediterranean Sea trade routes is the gateway. It's the connection, a physical connection between the Islamic civilizations of the Middle East and the rest of Western and Northern Europe. So geographically, it makes sense that the Italian city ports like Genoa, Florence, Venice are going to be the gateway, the entry points to any type of trade that is going into Europe. So follow along in the second paragraph. As trade goods spread further north, cities like Cologne, Bourges, Paris, London, and Lisbon became centers of trade and banking. Like in Italian cities, trade led to the establishment of a wealthy class of merchants and bankers who could afford to commission work from artists and help pay for new architecture. So these are the type of people that are spending money on, like our fictitious character Mario's artwork. He's living in wealthy trade and banking cities like Florence, Genoa, Venice, and those are the places that a lot of this new art and architecture will be revived. So what caused an increase in trade between Italian cities and the Ottoman Empire? Well, we said it has to do with geography, and it has to do with what is coming from other places through trade. So first off, after the Crusades, the paragraph we read said that Europeans were interested in trading with the Middle East. This unfortunate conflict actually gave Europeans a little bit of a taste and exposure to what kinds of cultural things were going on in the Islamic civilizations of the Middle East. The food, the inventions, all the knowledge that we learned about in the Islamic Golden Ages of the Abbasid Caliphate. So Italy, having many port cities, was the connection piece between Western Europe and the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. Geographically, they were in the right spot to receive ideas and new cultures. Not new cultural ideas, new to them, but also those Greco-Roman preserved pieces of knowledge from the Ottoman Empire. So we have one more question to finish off our last page. Let's go back to our packet. So in Mario's story, we learn that there are wealthy families, wealthy bankers, merchants that are investing and commissioning artists to make, Greco-Roman style sculptures, build, new parts of the buildings. And we want to take a little bit of a case study, just a very short one, of a particular famous Italian family who was very wealthy and very influential, had a big role in spurring the Renaissance to begin in cities like Florence. So this is the Medici family. So read along with me. The Medici family funds art in Florence. Wealthy merchants like the Medici family turned their interest to beautifying cities like Florence. They funded artists like Mario, architects and scientists to study Greek and Roman buildings and texts, then to build new Italian achievements. Without money from trade, the achievements of the Renaissance would not have been created. So it's the wealth of trading and banking families like the Medici that literally funds this revival of Greco-Roman art. So the Medici family gained their wealth from the Medici Bank, which financed merchants in Italy. Eventually, the family came to rule over the entire town of Florence. They funded works of art throughout the city and became influential when family members became pope. 4 of them, actually. 4 Medicis ended up becoming pope. And they married into royal families throughout Europe. So again, people like Mario, in order to be successful and to kind of spread the ideas of the Renaissance, they have to know who wants them to, commission and who wants their art. They have to be in the right spot at the right time. And places that are the right spot are these trading, business city centers like Florence and Venice, and Genoa in Italy. And the Medici family are going to be the ones that have the biggest influence on spurring the Renaissance. So let's answer our question. Wealthy merchants like the Medici family helped spur the Renaissance because they used their wealth to invest in Greco-Roman style artists and architects throughout Florence, Italy. We're going to see tomorrow a lot of characteristics of Renaissance artwork. We took a little bit of a glimpse into some of the statues and Greco-Roman style building in yesterday's pictures. But here's another little glimpse at an example. This is the Cathedral of Florence, Santa Maria del Fiore, a building that the Medici family had a role in constructing and adoring with art. So we're going to see more examples like this, more sculpting pieces, and we're going to see, old Greco-Roman style domes and arches and the humanism that is, built into their human figures and their sculptures. So tomorrow we're going to take a look at a lot of different cultural characteristic examples of Italian Renaissance art. But this today gives us a very, very clear picture of how Italy is in the right place at the right time, and they're helping to spread this Greco-Roman knowledge, this rebirth of that Greco-Roman culture that was preserved by the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, and it entered Europe through Italy, through Italian trade centers. This is a very big positive for trade. Remember, the Black Plague was a negative for trade. Trade brings everything, whether it's ideas, disease, religion, food. Trade is very, very big. All right, so just a quick reminder. So folks, there is no assignment due to submit today, but just as a heads up, after we do our characteristics of the Renaissance tomorrow, there will be a very short Google form of a couple of review questions, just so I can check in to see how you're doing and to see what you've learned over these last couple of pages. So I will see you back here tomorrow. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, and don't forget about checking over Aspen and Classroom for any much older or recent assignments that you are still a little bit behind on. All right, have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.